Hi everybody! Today we are starting with the explanation of modal verbs. First of all, let's have a look at the modal verbs themselves. We have can, could, may, might, must, needn't, should, ought to, will, would, and shall. When we study the modal verbs, we also see verbs like have to or to be able to. But these are not modal verbs. They are used to replace them in some occasions. Let's start with the form of the modal verbs, because they are different, or we can find some differences between these verbs and the normal verbs. First of all, these verbs are followed by an infinitive without to. As you can see, must read. Must is followed by read. She should eat more vegetables. Should is followed by eat. Both read and eat are infinitives without to. But we have a modal verb that is ought to. Ought to be. Ought has the to in its form. It means the same as should. People should be more aware of climate change. A second difference regarding the other verbs is that modal verbs, they have no s on the third person singular. So we have she can swim. We don't add any s after swim because this is an infinitive. But we have she swims because this is the third person singular for the present simple. A third point is that for questions, we place the modal verb at the beginning of the sentence. Can I go to the toilet, please? And finally, to make negative sentences, we only need to add not to the phrasal verb. She might not be at home, she cannot speak Japanese. Pay attention to the verb can because we normally, when we add not, we have two different words like might, not. But in the case of can, we only have just one word, cannot. We can also use contractions. So we shouldn't behave so badly. I can't play chess. Again, pay attention to the verb can because we don't add end apostrophe t, we only add apostrophe t. It's a bit different to the other verbs. Now let's have a look at the use of each modal verb. Let's start with can. Can has 4 different uses. Ability, for example, I can play chess, say you guys cats. Permission, can I go to the toilet? Request, can you close the door? And finally, general possibility. You can ski. That means that you can ski because there's a snow. Now let's see some uses of can but in negative that are more or less exclusive in the negative form. First, we have prohibition. We saw that can is used to express permission. So if it is in negative, that means that it is prohibited. For example, you can't smoke here. That means that it is prohibited. You don't have permission for that. In this case, is the same use as mustn't that we will see later on. A second use is negative deduction. That means that we are sure, that we are certain that something is false. The lights are on, they can't be at home. we are sure that they are not at home. Now it's turn for could. Could is used to express past ability. In this case, is the past of the verb can. For example, I could swim at 5. That means that when I was 5 years old, I could swim. I was able to swim. A second use for could is polite request. We saw that we can use can for request, but could is a bit more polite. For example, could I use the toilet? The difference between can is puc and could is podría. A third use is to express possibility. Example, there could be some cake left. That's our opinion. We are not sure about that. It's a possibility based on our opinion. And these are the three uses of could. But now we're going to compare can, could, and some other verbs like to be able to and to be allowed to. Regarding ability, we have can for the present and could for the past. But what happens when we have to use the present perfect or the future with will? In this case, we use to be able to. For example, I've been able to finish my project on time. This is present perfect. Or I will be able to speak Chinese. This is future with will. Because will can doesn't exist. So in the present we have can and are is able to that we can use more or less indistinctively. So you can say I can speak English or I am able to speak English. Obviously can is more often used because it's shorter. And in the past we have could and was were able to. But in this case, there are some differences in meaning. For example, in affirmative sentences, we can use for past ability could. Jim could play the piano. But we could also say Jim was able to play the piano because for past ability both are correct. But when we refer to a past action, that means a particular situation, only was or were able to is possible. For example, the drivers were able to stop before they crashed into each other. This is a particular situation. In negative sentences, we can use either could or was or were able to. There's no difference in meaning. We could say, for example, the pool was closed, so they couldn't have a swim, or they weren't able to have a swim. And finally, with verbs of senses, we normally use could, even if it is a particular situation. And as we said before, for the other tenses, we use to be able to, writing the verb to be in the proper tense. Regarding permission, we have can for the present and could for the past. But what happens when we need to use other verb tenses? In this case, we use to be allowed to. But we can also use to be allowed to in the present or in the past. For example, you could say, I can't go out tonight, or I am allowed to go out tonight. And there's no difference in meaning. So in the present, you can use can or allowed to, and in the past, you can use could or allowed to. So it's not like be able to, that there are some differences in meaning. On with may. We will see two uses for may. First, we have polite request. For example, may I use your pen? And a second use of may is possibility. For example, it may rain later. It's something that is not sure, but we guess that it may happen. It is possible to happen. Then we have the modal verb might. The main use for might is possibility. For example, I might go to the disco. This means that perhaps I will go to the disco. But what's the difference between may and might? May is a bit more probable. So far, we've seen that to express possibility, we can use can, could, may, or might. But what's the difference between them? We use can to express general possibility. For example, you can park here. That means that it is possible to park here because there is a space. On the other hand, could, may, or might express that something is possible, but it is our opinion. For example, it may or might or could rain later. That is our opinion. Perhaps it will rain. Now is the turn of must. The first use of must is when we express obligation or necessity. For example, you'll be leaving college soon, you must think about your future. It is necessary for you to think about your future. A second use for must is positive deduction. For example, the lights are on, they must be at home. Is when we are certain, we are sure that something is true. Regarding obligation, we use must for the present. For example, I'm late, I must hurry. And for the other tenses, we use have to in its correspondent form. Let's see some examples. I had to go to the doctor yesterday. This is in the past simple. Or we'll have to do better next time. That's in the future. But what happens in the present? In the present, must and have to coexist. We use must when the speaker feels that something is necessary, but we use have to when the situation makes something necessary. Let's see some examples. For example, imagine that you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, you must exercise more. It's what the speaker feels, it's what the doctor feels. Then you go back home and they ask you, what did the doctor tell you? He told me that I have to exercise more. That's not your opinion, that's not what you feel, it's what the doctor said. I said that the second use for must is deduction. We said that it was for positive deduction. In this case, we are certain, we are sure that something is true. We also said that can't was for negative deduction. In this case, we are certain that something is false or something is not true. So it's more about certainty. For example, the lights are on, they must be at home. We are sure, we are certain that they are at home because we see that the lights are on. But in this other case, the lights are off, we are sure that they aren't at home, so they can't be at home. Must in negative means prohibition. You mustn't smoke here. That means that it is prohibited. In this case, we can also use the modal verb can't that we previously saw that it also means prohibition. So you could say you mustn't smoke here or you can't smoke here. So regarding prohibition, we use mustn't y can't for the present, couldn't for the past, and for the other tenses, including the past, we can use to be allowed to. Some examples are you can't or you mustn't eat in class. For the past, I couldn't go out yesterday, but we could also say I wasn't allowed to go out yesterday. And for other tenses, for example, for the future, I won't be allowed to go to the party. Another modal verb is needn't. We use needn't to indicate no obligation. That means that something it is not necessary. For example, you needn't get up early. It's Saturday. That means that it is not necessary for you to get up early. We could also use you don't have to get up early, but remember, needn't is a modal verb, but don't have to is not a modal verb. So, what's the difference between mustn't and needn't? Mustn't means that something is a bad idea because it is prohibited, for example, but needn't means that something is not necessary. For example, I mustn't forget the key or I won't get in. So it is a bad idea to forget the key. On the other hand, you needn't make sandwiches. There's a cafe. So it isn't necessary to make sandwiches. But if you want to, you can make them. Now it's time for should and ought to. They mean the same. We use them to express advice or opinion. For example, you're not very well, you should see a doctor or you ought to see a doctor. So, in my opinion, that is the best thing to do. You should see a doctor. Now, let's see the difference between should, ought to, and had better. Had better is not a modal verb, but like modal verbs, is followed by the infinitive without to. As I said before, we use should and ought to give a piece of advice or to give our opinion. But we use had better for warnings. So this is a stronger meaning. For example, you should study harder. That's my opinion. It's raining. You'd better take an umbrella. That has a stronger meaning. And as you can see, you'd better is the short form for had better and is followed by the infinitive without to like a modal verb. Another modal verb is shall. We normally use shall in the first person, shall I or shall we, and we use it to make offers and suggestions. For example, shall I help you? That's an offer. And shall we go to the cinema tonight? That's a suggestion. As you can see, we use shall I and shall we. Will is also a modal verb that we use for promises or offers. I will help you. That could be a promise or an offer depending on the situation. And finally, we see would that we use for politeness. For example, would you like to have a cup of tea? And with this, we finish the explanation on the modal verbs.